think a lot of that is around really trusting your team and having those really strong relationships and good communication so you can delegate but also be able to be really honest about how it needs to be done. And because it's hard, I think people stop delegating because they ask people to do something for them, it doesn't get done in the way they expect, and so they decide to just keep it next time. But as long as you've got that open dialogue and you can be really clear about what it is you need and then offer some sort of feedback about how it might be done differently next time if there's a problem, then I think you kind of get better at it. I think it's a muscle that you have to build up, really, delegation.
Welcome back to Level Up Leadership, the podcast where we explore what modern leadership looks like. Today's episode is a little bit different because we're doing it as part of Podcast-thon. That's a groundbreaking non-profit initiative where podcasts worldwide dedicate an episode of our podcast to promoting a charity of our choice. All of us releasing simultaneously during 1 week to maximise visibility and impact. You can find out more about Podcast-thon at podcastthon.org. There'll be a link in the show notes. So my guest today is Alice Matthews, the Chief Executive of Mediation Plus. That's a charity here in East Sussex in the UK that helps people navigate conflict constructively. Their mediators support families, young people, neighbours and workplaces to rebuild communications and restore relationships before issues escalate. It's a mission that's vital in communities as well as the workplace. Alice is passionate about the human side of leadership, empathy, listening and creating conditions for people to thrive, even amid disagreement. This was a brilliant opportunity to explore leadership in the charity sector, the nuances of working with volunteers rather than paid employees, navigating charitable funding streams instead of traditional profit and loss, and how mediation teaches us to turn conflict into positive change. Whether you're a seasoned manager or stepping into leadership for the first time, there is plenty here to take away. So let's jump in with my conversation with Alice Matthews from Mediation Plus. The podcast is always about leadership and we will be talking about leadership, but we've entered into a charity special. We're here to talk about Mediation Plus, and I'm going to let you explain what Mediation Plus is. And I think as a good starting point, why don't we just go straight into that? Why don't you say a little bit about the charity, what you do and who you support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Chief Executive of Mediation Plus, and we are a small Sussex-based charity that offers conflict resolution services. A lot of that's community mediation. We do a huge amount of sort of neighbourhood mediation where there are disputes between either immediate neighbours or people sharing blocks. And then we also do family mediation between separating couples, either divorcing or people that haven't been married but are separating and are trying to manage that process and all of the challenges that come with that. We do a project called Time to Talk, which is a wonderful project. It's intergenerational mediation between young people and their parents and carers, where those relationships have broken down or there's a particular issue that's causing conflict. And then we do lots of training, train mediators, and we can run workshops to help people to understand how conflict arises and how they might manage it. And we also do spoke and workplace mediation. So where it doesn't fit into those other project areas, we can take on workplace mediation across the UK, but mainly in Sussex, and try and support employees where there's conflict. So it's a really broad range of conflict resolution services. Where we can't offer mediation, we can also offer one-to-one support. So we do quite a lot of conflict coaching, and we've trained a lot of our mediators in conflict coaching.
So quite a few strings to the bow there, but all coming under that mediation umbrella one way or another. So would you mind just saying a bit about what exactly mediation is? Because sometimes it might sound obvious, but I know that when I've spoken to people about mediation, they do sometimes maybe get the wrong end of the stick, maybe confuse it with arbitration or other forms of negotiation, which is not what mediation is all about, is it? So do you want to just set the record straight there? Yeah,
absolutely. It's really easy to assume that people know what it is, but I think often people don't even think about mediation unless they're in a position where they need it or someone mentions it to them. So it's a really good point. So mediation is a confidential, impartial, non-judgmental process where a mediator acts as a neutral third party, and they facilitate conversations between two people who are in conflict. And so there's quite a clear process of normally meeting with each of those individual, we call them parties, they might be households or colleagues, but meeting with them individually to understand what's going on and perhaps help them to understand a bit more about what's happening. And then where it's appropriate and safe to do so, bringing people together so we can carefully manage and facilitate a conversation where they're supported to hear each other build some shared understanding, and then hopefully work towards a shared agreement. So the mediator isn't there to sort of make recommendations or give advice. They're just there to help the people that are in the room to find a solution that works for each of them. Yeah. And that might mean drawing up a written agreement, but sometimes it's also just about agreeing how people are going to communicate moving forward, it could be about anything. What we really know from our process is that you can get value from any stage. So even if you go through mediation and you don't have a joint meeting, just the process of meeting with a mediator and understanding a bit more about our own role in conflict can be really helpful and might help people to reduce their experience of the conflict or how they're responding to it. So a very clear set process with a clear set of principles.
One of the things that I always try to tease out is anything that's helpful from one industry to another or different between sectors. And this is the first time we've been speaking purely about charities and third sector on this podcast. Yeah. So maybe before we get into too much of that, could you give us the nuts and bolts of, I mean, how many paid employees, how many volunteers, how many clients, if you call them clients, or people do you service, just so we've got a bit of a handle on the size and the complexity of the organisation?
Yeah. So I think I said at the beginning we're a small charity, so I'm the only full-time employee. We then have 9 part-time staff across those different work areas that I mentioned, helping to coordinate those cases and support our volunteers and the charity. And then we are incredibly fortunate. We've got almost 60 volunteers who are trained in mediation and conflict coaching in those different areas, who help us to reach the whole of Sussex with mediation, and they come from all different walks of life. So some people might have a legal background, or they've been teachers, they might have had an interest in counselling, or they might just have raised their own children or experienced mediation themselves and want to give back. We've also got a couple of self-employed mediators who do our family mediation, because you need accreditation to be a family mediator, and some skilled workplace mediators that we call upon if it's a particularly complex case and we need some sort of HR expertise. But the bulk of what we do is through our volunteers, and we wouldn't be able to function at all without all of their support. They each bring something to mediation, so we're kind of super proud that a lot of everything we achieve is based on volunteers. And you asked about numbers. We talk about parties, but often we mean households, so it could be multiple people. But we tend to see work on about 200 neighbourhood disputes a year. So, you could double that. They're normally 2 households at the minimum. We support about 60 to 70 families with our Time to Talk intergenerational mediation. And then in addition to that, with family mediation, it's almost 200 cases a year, I think. So quite a wide range of people that we support. Workplace is different. It sort of comes and goes because it's not, it's normally privately funded work, but we tend to see probably about 20 workplace mediation cases a year as well.
So, as you said, it's a small charity, but it's not that small in terms of the complexity you've just described there as well. And I guess at some point I should give a bit of a full disclosure here that I'm familiar with Mediation Plus because 9-10 years ago I was a trustee of the charity, so it's very close to my heart. And you mentioned about it being all about volunteer-led and reliant on the volunteers. And I remember the dedication and the passion back then, and it sounds like it's grown and gone from strength to strength, which I'm sure is no doubt due to the volunteers. Yeah. In amongst what you've just described, you've got training needs, accredited training needs, multiple different kinds of mediation, working with families. You're going to have all kinds of information sharing and data sharing. This is really complicated territory. How do you, as the chief executive, keep a handle and a grip on all of that complexity?
Yeah, a good question. And you're right in terms of saying we are small. I think when I say small, I mean working on a tiny budget. I think that's what I say when I'm talking about small, not necessarily in terms of our personnel. But there is lots to manage, and we are incredibly fortunate that we've got lots of people that support us, often free of charge. So we've got an incredible board of trustees. I should have mentioned them when I was talking about our team. But within that, we've got a safeguarding lead, somebody who has been working with supporting our charity for a long time, who's got a huge amount of expertise in that area. We've got someone who has helped develop our database, so she's a trustee, and so all of that work she does for free. She's also a volunteer mediator, so a really good understanding of like the nuts and bolts of what we need. And so I think we're really fortunate as a charity that we draw on lots of different people's expertise. I think there's also an element as a leader of a small charity that you kind of end up you have to know everything across the organisation, because you don't have HR, you don't necessarily have IT, you don't have someone whose sole focus is safeguarding. And so there are lots of hats to wear, but having those additional people that can support us is really helpful, and especially in our board of trustees, where we've then got people that are leading on it for us, or just steering us, making sure that we're covering everything that we need to cover.
So you must get pretty good at actually delegating and asking for support, which is a skill in itself, and it's something that often when I'm coaching leaders, particularly newer leaders, that they don't realise they need to do or quite how to do it. So you must have got pretty good at realising you can't do all of the doing and actually getting that support.
Yeah, it's something I've really had to work on, and I think probably only started getting better at it when I realised that there was just too much to achieve, and that actually it was probably to the detriment of the charity that I was trying to hold everything. I was really lucky. I had a charity mentor through the Sussex Charity Mentor Scheme a couple of years ago, and I spent a lot of time talking to him about delegation, and he gave me some really good analogies that have really stayed in my head that I try and remember. But yeah, a delegation is really important, and I think that it's certainly something you have to learn and practice. And I think a lot of that is around really trusting your team and having those really strong relationships and good communication, so you can delegate but also be able to be really honest about how it needs to be done. And because it's hard, I think people stop delegating because they ask people to do something for them, it doesn't get done in the way they expect, and so they decide to just keep it next time. But as long as you've got that open dialogue and you can be really clear about what it is you need, and then offer some sort of feedback about how it might be done differently next time if there's a problem, then I think you kind of get better at it. I think it's a muscle that you have to build up, really, delegation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a bit about your overall leadership journey? So obviously you've been a chief executive for, I think you said 9 years when we spoke offline. Almost 9 years.
Yeah.
But your leadership journey wouldn't have started there. So could you maybe wind your memory back to when you first sort of either realised or promoted into a leadership role, and what that was like for you and those early leadership lessons?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it probably did start there. So my jobs before that were sort of community development. I did a lot of community development work where I had volunteers, and potentially, I think I've line managed the administration team or the project team. But my first sort of proper leadership role was Mediation Plus. However, we were much smaller then, so I think it was a slightly different role to what it is now. It was a part-time role managing 2 other members of staff, and so it wasn't a huge leap from what I was already doing. However, in the last 8 years, we've grown hugely. So we've gone from those 2 staff and just covering a couple of districts to being almost Sussex-wide and being a much wider team. So I think actually this job has grown with me, which is really nice, because I've had the opportunity to learn throughout. I've learnt a lot about myself. I know my weaknesses as well as potentially my strengths. But yeah, I think it's probably fair to say my leadership journey started with Mediation Plus, and we've grown together. And I've learnt a lot. I've been really lucky that my experience as a charity sector is people are really, and potentially elsewhere, but my life has been in the charity sector, people are really open and happy to share and have honest but confidential conversations about the challenges of leading a charity, but also about where we can support each other. And I feel really fortunate that I've got kind of a good peer support network of other chief executives who face the same challenges as me, who are just really open to sitting down and talking about them and offering that peer support. So it feels like there's always a real mutual understanding there.
Just want to reflect that back, just also for everyone who's listening, to what you said there about peer support and having that network around you. And the reason I just want to echo that back is because that really is so important. And I do like to try and give advice through this podcast. And I don't imagine for one second it's just a coincidence that the charity happened to grow during the 9 years that you've been there. I think you're being quite humble that you've grown it during your time as the chief executive. And I'm sure that's due in no small part to that kind of networking, having that support and learning from other people who've walked the walk before you. And I think that's really important for other leaders to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yeah, I do. I feel really grateful. I also, I spoke about our trustees earlier, but I feel that that Mediation Plus is very fortunate to have a strong board of trustees. I know that other charities, don't necessarily have that, or they just have a very different shape. The trustees are a very different shape. They might be much more hands-on or much more distant. I think we've got this really nice balance where we've got a huge amount of expertise, but also a really lovely level of sort of openness and good communication, and I can reach out. I never feel fearful if there's something I'm finding challenging. There's always a trustee there that's got the right expertise. We've got an employment lawyer, and she's incredible. Also just really accessible and easy to speak to. So I think knowing you're well supported goes a long way, because you then feel like you can explore new areas without feeling completely alone, even when, as a chief executive, you often are doing things by yourself and trying to find new paths through challenges. Yeah.
Should we talk a little bit more about some of the work that Mediation Plus does, and maybe some of the individual strands? We could do, probably not all of them, but a deep dive on a couple of them. And maybe, if you don't mind, if we start with the workplace mediation, feels quite relevant for this podcast. Do you want to just tell us a bit more about that, where you get your parties, how they refer themselves in, and what normally sort of happens on a typical mediation case?
So a lot of our referrals now come from organisations that we've already worked with, which I think is a real testament to our workplace mediators, because we're sort of getting repeat custom. And the reality is that a lot of the referrals we get are when things have got to extreme measures. So, people are off sick, the conflict has got to a stage where employers are losing good employees, the communication's completely broken down, and we're able to step in and gently meet with those parties, understand where they're at and where they might want to where they want to get to, and then bring people together. And it tends to work slightly differently to sort of neighbourhood or intergenerational mediation, which go at quite a slow pace. Workplace mediation, I think, can be a bit more succinct, and you build on the momentum of meeting with the individuals and bringing them together. But I mean, if there is anyone listening who is interested in workplace mediation or feels that there might be some conflict within their team, I think I would really want to encourage people to use it as an early intervention. So have those conversations about how mediation might be able to help before things escalate and get really difficult and you start to lose those really good members of staff, and try and embed it in your general processes of how you manage grievances and disputes and little challenges between teams, because conflict is a healthy part of running an organisation. I'd say people assume that mediation is for big disputes, but really where we're likely to have the biggest impact is where it's used as an early intervention, and it's kind of embedded in people's processes and the way they work. I think sometimes we wait until it becomes it reaches the point where people start looking at grievance policies and those types of things, and then you automatically start to become defensive. It becomes a very formal process, and actually mediation is about rebuilding relationships, finding a way forward rather than finding blame, placing blame on someone. And so I think it's really important, and you can see the shift in people when we're doing workplace mediation, coming in very nervous, not able to talk to the other person, potentially not even making any eye contact, and then in best case scenario, they're leaving together, have an agreed way forward, feel that they can continue to work together, and then you've got two people whose careers are going to continue. They're going to be able to stay at a place that they enjoy, and the employer manages to keep two, sometimes 3, 4 really good employees. So it has all of those different benefits, and it is a really powerful tool that every organisation should be using and normalising. It should just be part of how we all communicate, rather than a emergency, quick, let's Google a mediation service. I think it's really important.
You're listening to the Level Up Leadership podcast. If you found this episode, that probably means you're a leader looking to level up their leadership game. If that's right, make sure you follow us and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. We're available on all major platforms. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll see we regularly have additional bite-sized mini-clips of the most important points. And if you subscribe to our main hub on levelupleadership.uk, that's all one word, levelupleadership.uk, you'll have access to the articles that come with each episode, as well as additional bonus articles, some of which are guests or collaborations with other writers. Make sure you follow and subscribe to Level Up Leadership now. Okay, back to the episode.
Let's talk about intergenerational mediation. So I think it's probably one of the lesser known projects, or the types of mediation. The community mediation work we do around neighbourhood disputes is so important. It can really make a difference, and we all know how important neighbourhood relationships are and feeling safe. But intergenerational mediation is often not talked about enough, and as an organisation, it's something I'm constantly talking about and trying to find grant funding for, because it's such a powerful tool. So just for anyone that sort of doesn't know, intergenerational mediation, or at least for Mediation Plus, is mediation between young people over the age of 11, so kind of secondary school age and college age, up to the age of 18. And it's between them and their parents or carers. So sometimes it's, mum and dad together. Often it's separated parents, or a young person in a blended family. We have had lots of cases where there are kinship carers, so someone, another family member, maybe grandma, and young person living together. And so we kind of use the word family quite loosely, because it's whoever is in that young person's immediate circle and support. And it's for me, it's an early intervention, and it does a lot to protect young people from all of the other things that are going on. And so if you feel like you're comfortable at home, it feels safe, you've got adults around you that you can communicate with and will support you, you're much less likely to want to spend all of your time outside. You're less likely to enter risky relationships with sort of young adults. You're potentially you're protected against antisocial behaviour, because you've got that supportive parent network. You're more likely to be attending school if you've got supportive parents who are engaged in your education. And so it's such an important thing to have that. I think we underestimate it sometimes, to have that safety of home, because everything else is kind of the foundation of everything else that young people are doing. But also those relationships are really easily damaged. I think they can be quite fragile, especially if we're talking about teenagers. They're trying to discover who they are. Often, young teenagers are still looking up to their parents, and none of us are perfect. We've all got our own complications, especially with cost of living. COVID was really challenging for all of us, and I think we're still feeling some of that. And we're often working with families who are living in houses that are too small for them. There's no proper communal space. Potentially there are, both adults aren't in the house a lot at the same time because they're doing shift work. And so they can be really complex families. And bringing people together in intergenerational mediation can just be the thing that people need to start to reset and communicate, and sort of leave their egos at the door and start to talk about, how they're feeling, what's happening for them, and create a little bit of understanding, and then movement towards some sort of resolution. And it's different to other mediations because it moves at a slower pace. It moves at the pace of whoever needs to move slowest normally. So often the young person, although occasionally we're surprised and it's the young person who's making the referral. They want to sit down with mum or dad and have a conversation about something that's happening. And it's so hard, I think, with mediation to really pinpoint which bit where the magic happens. It just seems it's the families that create it, and we're just creating that safe space. But often there's just a shift in that first or second joint meeting when we've got people together, when people start to genuinely listen to each other, leave their own stuff at the door, and you can see a softening of everyone, a much better, better conversations. People are actually listening. My favourite thing about intergenerational mediation is often that people come back on the third or second time and they say, "Oh, we were pretending the mediators were in the room, and we were having a mediation conversation." And that's exactly what we're doing. We're just modelling how to do it, what a safe conversation looks like, so people can then take that into their lives and into any future issues that they face. Because life isn't perfect, but it's about understanding how we might face them as families together. Yeah.
That's incredibly valuable work, and changing lives, changing families, and that sort of legacy of leaving an understanding so they can actually continue to practice those skills themselves. So I think it's fantastic work. You mentioned right at the beginning there about grant funding. And of course, in the charitable sector, it's very different to the private sector, profit and loss and sort of sales and revenue kind of models. I think this is something where your role as CEO and your trustees, particularly your treasurer, this is where you come into your own in terms of the sort of strategy for the long-term sustainability of the charity. So could you tell us a little bit about how you navigate that?
Yeah, so I think the charity sector as a whole is facing this sort of triple threat of increased costs. So, the same across any sector, increased costs, especially in terms of staff costs, but also just general, IT and all of those, and all those extra costs. Increased demand for our services. We're seeing that across the board. More and more people are facing conflict and are struggling to find their way through it in all of the sectors that we're working in. And then a more challenging funding environment. So a lot of the funders that we are applying to have seen demand or the number of applications that they receive increase exponentially. And they are having to tighten their criteria, so that's reducing the amount of funding that we've got access to try and manage that. So BBC Children in Need recently have put a whole new criteria in place to really try and funnel applications coming in because they were just getting overwhelmed by it. I actually have a volunteer role with BBC Children in Need. I'm on their South East Region Committee, so I support their work to decide where their funding goes. So I get to see it from both sides, but it's really challenging. You asked a question about sort of leadership and grant funding, and I think that for a lot of the funders that we apply to, what they want to see is authenticity and just a genuine understanding of the people that you're supporting. And so you can write an amazing funding bid, you can give them loads of numbers and statistics about local need, you can chuck something into AI and get something that sounds incredibly articulate, but really what funders want is that genuine credibility and knowing what your charity can achieve and understanding its impact. And I think as a leader, that is kind of one of your biggest roles is, for want of a better word, selling what you're doing, but also creating that trust and making sure that people feel that you're a sensible organisation to fund. And so you really have to keep your finger on it, because you want to make sure that all your relationships are strong. Any reporting that you're required to do is done really well, because they will be looking back on that if you're asking for more funding. And making sure that any messaging that goes out is suitable for so many different audiences. It's not just the people that are using your service or your partners through the contracts we've got with police, for example, but it's also people that might look at it in the future when they're trying to make a decision about whether you're a safe place to put their money. I think impact and monitoring is something we've always struggled with as a charity sector, within mediation, because we don't have those extra posts for people doing all of those things. Sometimes we're so busy on the day-to-day work of managing the cases as they come in that we're not great at measuring our impact or measuring what we stopped from happening. That's the real challenge, I think, because a lot of our work around neighbourhood disputes, we're stopping things escalating. And so how do you evidence to people that because of mediation all of these things didn't happen? And so I think also as a leader, it's trying to understand that, find the resources to really be able to demonstrate and articulate your impact. I feel like I'm constantly selling mediation, but I think I can do that well as a leader because I truly believe that it is a really powerful tool, and just having communication skills or the communication tools that we teach our mediators is a really valuable thing, for employers to do, for leaders to give their teams. And so it kind of feels like an easy sell for me because I just really understand it. But yeah.
So I guess when it comes to telling the stories and showcasing what Mediation Plus does, probably a good thing to finish on before I ask you the same last question I ask everyone. Why don't you just tell people where they can find out a bit more about Mediation Plus, see those good stories, and how can they connect with you?
So our website is probably the best place to start, and if you wanted to use our service, we've got online referral forms there. So it's www.mediation-plus.org.uk. Follow us on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, but also just give us a call. I think one of the positive things that came out of COVID is that we are able to do things online a lot more. We've really got good at that. We've learned a lot from doing mediation online, and so we're not limited to Sussex. In fact, in terms of workplace mediation, we often take cases across the whole of the UK. So have a look on our website and just drop us a question if you've got any, if you want to just understand a bit more about what we're doing.
I'll make sure all of the relevant links are in the show notes so people can access those. And then finally, you knew there was one question coming. It's my usual question, as this is a leadership podcast. I would love to know, who is a leader that you admire and why?
So I struggle to narrow this down to one person. So I don't know if it's really cheeky to say more than one. So my brain instantly went to sort of in the mediation world. Who do I admire in the mediation world? And there's someone called David Liddell who runs an organisation called the TCM Group. And I've heard him speak several times. He's a really good speaker and really, really engaging, and you come away feeling really enthusiastic. But he speaks a lot about a piece of work they've developed called the resolution framework. I think it's something you have to buy into, and so I don't know enough about it. But basically, it's supporting organisations to look at their culture and to take a sort of resolution approach to any conflict rather than a sort of grievance policy approach. And I really like that, and I think that the more we can do that as an organisation, the Mediation Plus can do it. We should be, mediation should be external but also internal in terms of how we communicate with all of our teams. But the more other people can adopt that as well, I think the better our workplaces will be. So he's my mediation person. But I also have always admired Alex Polizzi, and I think it's potentially, I don't know if you know her, you know that she's on the hotel inspectors. I think she's probably all the things I would quite like to be better at, which is being very straight and honest while still just being really authentic, because she, and having shared experiences with the people she's talking to. So you can tell that when she's giving people that feedback about how they might need to change, it's coming from a place of, it feels to me like it's coming from a place of love and a desire for them to be successful as well. There's something about her straight talking that I just really admire, because it's just always comes from a place of kindness normally. Sometimes I think it's probably for entertainment, but I think she's an awesome woman. I know that she's locally has businesses as well. And I know people who work for her who she's very accessible to. So I think she's quite an impressive person.
Two excellent examples, so thank you very much. and thank you for sharing your stories and all the advice today. A final plug from me for people to go and check out Mediation Plus. It is a fantastic charity, so I really do hope people will click on the links that we'll provide and go and have a look. But for now, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Lee.
So that was my conversation with Alice from Mediation Plus. 3 standout leadership lessons here. First, build a robust network of peers and trustees in her case. It's not a coincidence that the charity has thrived from year to year because of all of the mutual support and shared experience. One person can't lead an organisation. Okay, you might be at the top and it might all fall to you, the buck might stop at your desk, but asking for help is never a sign of weakness. It's always a sign of great leadership. And I think that's the second lesson here. Master the art of asking for help early. Like Alice's charity mentor taught her, it's essential for scaling without burnout. And third, treat delegation as a muscle to strengthen, with clear communication and trust. That turns volunteers or staff into teams. It turns them into your greatest asset. Now, today's episode was part of Podcasthon. You can find out more about Podcasthon at podcasthon.org. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's all about dedicating one episode to a charity of your choice. It happens every year, and we all release the episode within 1 week to generate the most amount of impact and awareness. Now, it's too late for this year, but if you like the idea, you can register now and you can be part of Podcasthon next year. Okay, that's it from me for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, I'm sure your network will too, so please share it widely. You can follow along at levelupleadership.com levelupleadership.uk. That's all one word, levelupleadership.uk. That's our main hub, and if you subscribe there, it's part of Substack, so you'll receive articles along with every episode. Or if you prefer, you could subscribe on YouTube, and on YouTube you'll get some additional bite-sized mini clips. So Alice's mini clips will be dropping in a few weeks' time. Watch this space. Or you can just follow the podcast wherever you usually get your podcasts. We're available on all good platforms. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep levelling up.